And good hello once again, and this is LC Lupus for another episode of A Utopian Project. The Utopian Project sounds better, but I specifically went against that idea because it's not definitive. Mine is not definitive. Anyway, let's move on. This is if you're not familiar, this is a series looking at utopianism and some possible utopian ideas about how we can potentially live. Should be a fun old discussion. This is the 6th video called Childcare, Education and Curricula. So obviously we're looking at education. The title should give it away. I intentionally made the titles very obvious. So, when it comes to teaching and education, this is an area probably that, because many of the other areas I am more so interested in rather than being necessarily an expert in anything like that. Like, I don't know anything about agriculture. I just have ideas about how things might be better, potentially. Obviously, there are various ways it could be better. People who are much smarter than me in those areas will be able to have ideas on solutions to these kind of things. But teaching, I am a teacher, so I'm hoping that I can, in some way, actually talk about this. I'm been a teacher for, over half a decade, and I am also sort of academia type sad person. So, I can talk about some of these things, and I know them a bit better than sort of the other ones. So, firstly, there has to be, because remember, this is a more communal sort of setting. People are much more communal in this system. So, in our current system, we focus a lot on single parentage. You just have your parents, essentially, who might be literally a single parent, or it could just be, two people. Either way, that's a really horrible way to raise kids. Like just having such a small group to actually raise kids. Instead, it would be better to go towards more of the older tribal ways in which people essentially raised everyone. The entire village effectively raised everybody. You did have your parent and whatever, but everybody was effectively a potential guardian and somebody who could be trusted. And if you had smaller, closer-knit communities like this, it would be much easier to have a system like that. So just, firstly, families should not be forced to go through this alone. It's really hard to go through this alone. And like say, in our current society, we literally call them like single mothers. Like it's an expression, a single mother. And we know as soon as you say single mother, you're like, oh, that's someone who's struggling. They have to have a job and look after kids and do all the housework and everything themselves. Sort of, they're doing the man and the woman's job all together. And the idea, first of a man and woman's job is nonsense. Everybody should be contributing equally in many ways. That's just how it should be. But single parents have an extremely tough time. Now, let's say if it was either because of divorce or let's say it was because of death. Doesn't matter. Either way, you wind up on your own and now you're struggling. That isn't how it should be. In this kind of society, that isn't the way it would be, right? There would be a support network. You wouldn't have to work more just because you're now divorced or a widow. You wouldn't have to work harder. You wouldn't have to see your kids less. It would be exactly the same. It would not matter. And you would still be able to have other people to help you. So that's like a very important first thing that I think needs to be taken into account when it comes to sort of learning and having kids and all that kind of stuff. Because kids need a good, stable home, if at all possible, obviously. I didn't have the most stable home, and I turned out great aside from the depression. So it's good to preferably not have a society where you can be punished for having a kid by yourself. That's just not a good idea. So then when it comes to actual school, firstly, there should be very small classes. The way we currently have it where, I was in a class and each class would have, say, 30 people in it. So 30 people in a class, but your class would not be the only class that the teacher had, right? Now, in primary school, it's different because primary school, a teacher is more like an elaborate caretaker rather than necessarily a teacher in sort of the high school sense of the word. But once you get to high school, it's not like that anymore. Instead, it becomes much different, where you don't have 30 kids. You actually have like 200 kids, because they're spread out over multiple grades, and you just teach the one subject. So you don't really ever bond with your students. And as somebody who I've taught in much sort of smaller environments, both one-on-one and in small groups, it's much better because you can actually essentially become close to every single one of them. And it's much better when in my opinion, it is much better when a student sees you as a potential friend, as somebody who is willing to actually help them, and someone that they could go to if they had any issues, rather than just a lecturer. You know, because that's what a lot of teachers are. They just stand in front of the class, they give their little lecture, and they move on. Because there's just too many people to care about. So if you had a much smaller group, it'll be a lot easier for you to actually, build a relationship with each of your students, which is a much better thing. And then your students can also feel as if they are being helped and actually guided, because also teaching and learning varies. Now, you do get that thing which gets a lot of like buzz in some places, like, oh, some people are textile learners, some people are auditory learners. That stuff isn't really real. That stuff is not really real. It's the same kind of thing as trying to determine things according to that 16 personalities thing. Like, that's not really real. It's a pseudoscience. It's like astrology. It has no scientific backing. It can change over time, which means that like it's not exactly stable like a personality is. And the same with this kind of, I'm a textile learner. No, you might just have it easier doing textile, but you do learn through every single channel. And in many ways, every single channel should be, in some way, supplemented. Now, personally to me, in my teaching, I have found that a much more conversational, discursive style works. So small classes in which you're discussing things, and you're coming to an understanding with each other. And there's also none of this nonsense, respect-oriented pageantry. There's none of this like, oh, yes, Mr. whatever, yes, Mr. whatever, yes, ma'am, blah, blah. That's all nonsense. It should just be names. A teacher isn't a special person. They're just a teacher. They're a human. They just happen to have a lot of knowledge, or an amount of knowledge more than you, about a particular topic. That is what a teacher is. They're not something special. They're still a human being. So, small classes which are more discursive oriented, but not, it should also shift and change based on what you're doing. Right? So, you do get sort of academia type education, and then you get more actual, work kind of things. Now, not everybody is built for a more academic environment. That isn't to say, that isn't like some kind of disparaging thing or whatever. No, some people are not built for academia. That is fine. Trying to force everybody to basically do maths, for instance, trying to force everyone to do maths is not a good idea. Not everyone is good at maths. And we have this very stunted idea of what intelligence is. We're like, oh, intelligence is being good at maths, basically, which is nonsense, absolute nonsense. There's different types of intelligences. And also, being good at maths, I would probably say it's much more useful to be good with plumbing than to be good with maths. That is much more useful. I'm not good at maths. I'm terrible at maths. I am good at language stuff. And when I say language stuff, I just mean English. I can't speak another language. I can speak a little bit of Afrikaans, maar ek kan nie bietjie Afrikaans praat. You see, I even said that wrong. Ek kan bietjie Afrikaans praat. Ek kan nie Afrikaans praat nie. I can't speak Afrikaans. Okay, I'm terrible. The first thing I said was nonsense. The second thing I said was I can speak a little bit. And the third thing I said was I can't speak any. So I can't speak a lot of that. I'm literally just good at English. And even then, I'm not really good at the grammar side. I'm good at sort of the writing. I'm good at analysis, composition, those kind of things. That's what I'm good at. I don't know the names of grammatical units because I don't care. It doesn't matter. I do not, and I'm an English teacher, and I do not remember the difference between a transitive and an intransitive verb. I have to look it up every time because I think it's pointless and stupid. Why would you care unless you're doing linguistics? So things should be specified in that sense, right? I don't consider myself a particularly intelligent person, but other people for some reason do. I'm good at language. I'm good at randomly remembering things. I'm not good at maths. I'm not good at most things. I can't do anything with my hands. I I don't actually have good memorization. I'm not particularly clever. And I would say most people aren't particularly clever. Most people are very, very clever at something, right? I've always, it's not really true, but I've always liked this idea where people say everyone is a genius at something. Now, the concept of genius is a problem, but, that's also another thing. You shouldn't have this idea of a gifted child. That's also nonsense. Everybody, depending on how because a lot of the time with these gifted children, they're not just naturally gifted. Some of them are, sure, but a lot of the time a gifted child is somebody who has a better upbringing. They're raised by educated parents. Also, I shouldn't have said the word better. A more educated upbringing, not a better upbringing. So a more educated upbringing in which they are, say if the parents have university degrees, it's more likely that the kid is going to be raised with a higher level of education. So it's not actually genetic. It's because of your upbringing. It's from the nurture side. It's from what you were taught. You're not born a genius. You can make a genius. Someone like John Stuart Mill was effectively a created genius. So it's nonsense. And we shouldn't have this idea that there is a gifted child mentality. Every child should be treated as if they have their own unique abilities, and those abilities should be fostered when we see them. So some kids should continue into academia. Sure. If you're going to become like a teacher or whatever, if you're going to specialize in those kind of things, sure, whatever. But otherwise, you should go straight into apprenticeships. Now, when I had spoken before about this in this second video, I think about work versus passions, people who want to keep studying can just keep studying. There is no idea of a degree. Like, degrees are not really technically necessary. Degrees were an invention in many ways of it's a credentialing thing, and it really, really picked up steam once you got into the industrial era, the industrial age, industrial revolution. That's the word I'm looking for. Degrees did exist before that, but it really, really ramped up there because we needed to have more people who are qualified to do certain jobs. Now, if your work history and whatever was just tracked, you would know what someone can do. A degree is not necessary. You finished your education, cool. You went into this area, cool. That's what it should be more so than a degree. A degree is just a piece of paper, and also degrees are based on trying to pass an exam. If you're good at writing exams, you can get high marks, even if you don't know the work, which might seem counterintuitive to people who think that marks equal clever, but that isn't how it works. Marks do not equal clever. I've met many, many very intelligent students who get lower marks than people who I would say are less intelligent. That is something that happens. The people who are good at writing exams are people who do well at school, not people who are necessarily clever. They can be. You could be clever and good at writing exams, but not necessarily. They are not mutually exclusive. So, the curriculum, sure, if you're going to go into a more academic field, say if you're going to become a teacher in some kind of academic field, continue there. But if it turns out you're really good at something, go into an apprenticeship instead. So let's just say you have a knack for working with fabrics and stuff. Then you're going to end up, sure, you're still going to have other societal functions. So you're going to be doing street cleaning and, kitchen work, whatever, because everybody has to do it. But you're also going to slowly but surely learn to become a tailor. And then eventually, as you get older, you move away from those more manual labor-oriented jobs because the old should be given that kind of treatment. The old shouldn't have to keep doing manual labor. The old people should be doing more mental activities, which I spoke about in that second video, I believe. So, apprenticeships where you're slowly but surely learning the trade while also doing other things and having your own life. And then when you get old enough, you end up becoming a tailor essentially full-time because you've gotten now old enough to where you don't need to be doing those things anymore. And now you've learned your trade. And the thing is, a tailor does not need to know physics. You don't. If you want to learn physics, learn physics. Like, the reason I did maths and physics and biology in high school wasn't because I necessarily wanted to do them. I chose those subjects because I was told those are the subjects that were best for university. And you know what happened when I went to university? I did English and literature. Okay? I have not used maths aside from rudimentary Basically, I determine means all the time. That is the most complicated thing that I do with maths nowadays, is determining a mean, because I mark things. So I have to figure out percentage points. Otherwise, I do addition, subtraction. That's basically it. I do like my finances. I did not need to do what we often call in South Africa called pure maths. I didn't need to do that. I did it because I was told that you wouldn't be able to get into a university if you took maths literacy, which is like the sort of lower level maths. And I would say that's nonsense. Instead, we should have a much more adapted curricula, where the curricula changes depending on you. If you are good at maths, because everybody should be taught the fundamentals, but if you're really good at maths, then you should progress onto more advanced maths, because you are able to do something with maths. But if you're not good at maths, you should instead focus somewhere else. So the curricula should adapt around you rather than you adapting around the curricula. And this is why having like formalized degrees and stuff it's efficient, but it doesn't really prove anything. My fiance told me once she spoke to a person who was going to become a doctor. And you know what they did? They studied for exams and then they forgot the work afterwards, like most students do. Which immediately makes you go, wait, but you're going to become a doctor? It's like, yeah, but it's still just university. People are still going to do that. Just because you have a degree doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. It means that you passed. That's what it means. A degree means you passed. Doesn't mean you know what you're talking about, and you might not remember things years down the line. So what use is a degree? If you got a degree in linguistics and you haven't used linguistics in 30 years, do you still know what you're talking about? Do you still remember linguistics enough to be an expert in some description? So why necessarily learn it then? Instead, people should be doing what they want to do, and then they do what they want to do with their lives. But we've spoken about that before. Now, the thing is, what we currently do is that with like degrees, so the first degree was awarded in 1231, which is quite a while back. But then the Industrial Revolution, basically what happened with education was that once upon a time, education was for certain people, right? If you were a farmer, a blacksmith, whatever, you didn't need to learn to read and write. What are you, an aristocrat? No, unnecessary. Entirely unnecessary to know such nonsense. You're not a rich person, John. Calm down. You're going to be a farmer like me. There was no point to learn to read and write. Then educational reforms happened, where people could learn to read and write. But then the Industrial Revolution came. And basically what happens is a lot of jobs now were invented that required some level of skill for which you needed to go to university. So the way universities used to work is that it was for like rich people, and then when you did your exam, it was effectively an oral examination, which I would say is much better at actually determining whether or not you know what you're talking about. Because an oral examination, they can shift the questions around and see what you actually know. Whereas if you have to just go in and write an essay, you could be really good at writing essays. For instance, I'm good at writing essays. So I can essentially, I don't want to swear in this series, so I can BS my way through most things, actually. If you just gave me a little bit, I could write something up. And it would be possible because I'm good at writing. But that doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about, you know. So that is a very important thing that happened, was we switched from this verbal examination onto written. And the reason you do writing is because it's a lot faster to mark writing than to bring people in individually, sitting in front of like a council of people, all asking you questions and stuff. So let's say it takes you 2 hours to do your in-person exam. And it also takes you 2 hours to do your written exam. Now to you, same amount of time has passed. Difference is, do you know how many people can do a written exam at once? Do you know how many people can do a verbal exam at once? No contest. Universities and schools basically are assembly lines. They push you out as quickly as they can into the workforce, and hopefully you'll be fine. They're not actually good at preparing you for life. And education should be preparing you for life. It shouldn't just be giving you a degree and saying, yeah, you're capable of doing marketing now. Good luck finding a job. That isn't how it should be, right? We should not do it that way. It shouldn't be about profit, and it shouldn't be about having degrees. It should be more about actually having some kind of, you're tracking someone's, it's like everybody should essentially say your ID. It already tracks a lot of things about you, but your ID, for instance, should also track things like your education and experience level. Because if those were tracked, we can just place people in work that they could do rather than forcing them to sit on job listing sites and hope that something comes along and the person actually responds to them, because you'll send 1,000 job applications and you'll get back 20 responses, regardless of your qualification level. That's just sort of the way it goes. It's awful, but that's the way it is. And employment being tied to education is not really a great thing in the way we do it now. Instead, it should be completely overhauled, completely changed. This isn't something that needs to be reformed. This is something that needs to be torn down and completely redone. So that is what we should be doing with education, completely redoing it, fixing it, making it better, making the curriculum actually useful, and actually teaching people what they need to learn. In addition, something that I thought I could just leave to the sort of end is that we need to teach secular ethics in school. Schools should not be teaching religion at all. We have separation of church and state in South Africa, and we're supposed to have it in lots of other countries like America and such, but it doesn't. In America, first off, they're brainwashed into patriotism, where they have to do the Pledge of Allegiance every day, in which one of the things they say is that it's a nation under God. And in South Africa, the national anthem starts with Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika, which means God bless Africa. God should be removed from this equation. If you want to believe in a religion, fine. It should not be put onto education or the government at all. At all, at all. Because say in South Africa, because I can speak obviously on behalf of South Africa the most, Nkosi Sikelel' South Africa. Okay, Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika. Fine. God bless Africa. Okay. Now, I would say that's wrong, because you're saying God bless Africa. And someone might immediately say, I don't know, but it doesn't say Christian God. No, it doesn't say that, but it is a Christian God. It's very much about the Christian God. And also, of course, if you just say God, you could arguably say, oh no, but I could be talking about Jews or Muslims or Christians. I could be talking about any of them. But you're not. But furthermore, let's just say, fine, it refers to all of those gods. Whatever, it could be any of them. That's just monotheistic faiths. It's not referring to any polytheistic faiths. So, with multiple gods, say Hinduism has multiple gods. Or some religions that don't really have gods necessarily. So, say something like Shintoism doesn't really have gods in the traditional sense of the word. Or or Buddhism doesn't really have a gods in the traditional sense. They're more pantheistic in many ways. So there's those. So our one just mentions God, which is the Christian God, but you could say it is a monotheistic God. But that excludes polytheistic gods. It excludes pantheistic viewpoints. And of course, it excludes atheism. In America, you have to swear on a Bible if you go to, the court or whatever. I'm an anti-theist, which is a term I could explain more because it's a bit further on than sort of atheism. I will not swear on a Bible. I don't believe in the Bible. I don't think it's true. So why would I swear on a Bible? That means nothing to me. And the fact that we have it so ingrained, religion so ingrained into our education, is wrong. And that should be completely purged. No religion whatsoever in education. For instance, here's a good example of a teacher that should not be allowed to be a teacher because they're letting their religion get in the way of their teaching. My fiancée told me that her high school biology teacher, when she was taught evolution, which is in the curriculum, the teacher, before starting on the education, told them all, the entire class of students, that evolution is not real and that God made everybody and that she has to teach it because it's part of the curriculum. But it isn't real, so don't believe it. When your teacher tells you not to believe something she's about to teach you, that is a bad teacher and she should not be a teacher. She is allowing her personal feelings about God to get in the way of reality. And the thing is, if you believe in God, that's fine. But don't push it on others. Do not push it on others. Ever. Not in education, nothing. And also there's no special schools in this system, in this kind of utopia. There's no special schools for religious people. Everybody goes to the same schools. They're taught the same things until obviously their curriculum becomes adapted to them. Religion can certainly be something that you follow as a passion. It is fine. Don't force it on people, and don't use religious ethics. Now that is also a very important point. Ethics is also something that needs to be taught. Secular ethics, as I said earlier. Secular means non-religious. So they should not be religion taught. It is wrong to murder someone because it is wrong to murder someone, not because God says no. If you believe that, fine. But in this system, you will be taught actual ethical theories and how they conflict with each other, and how we don't know for sure what is right and what is wrong. That should be taught. Nuance. When you teach religious teachings, whatever, you're teaching that there's no nuance. What God says is yes, what God says is no. That isn't reality. The world is grey. It is complicated. It should be treated as if it was complicated. And that's why we need a secular ethics in which we teach things like you teach utilitarianism, you teach virtue ethics, you teach deontology, you teach care ethics. You need to teach these things and not just, because God says no. Because that also isn't very convincing. That's the same as saying, because I said no as a parent. That's a bad way of teaching. So, ethics needs to be baked in from very early. Being a good person, right? How to exist within society, and then having your education tailored to you. And I think that's where I'm going to end. That is the end of the 6th video, which is very exciting. It means we're halfway through the main videos, which is great. So this has been LC Lupus. You can find me at LC_Lupus on Twitter and Instagram. Instagram, I just post pictures of animals and nature. Otherwise, you can check out in the description. There's some things there about Wolf Dog Publishing. And through there, I've published my first book. By the time this series ends, probably the second book will come out too. Probably during this. Anyway, you can check that out. It's called The Cyborg Wilderness. And it is eco-fiction about a cyborg who has survived the sort of apocalyptic war that ended the world. And now she roams the empty wastes trying to find purpose and hope. And the thing is, hope is to be found in the world, even a dead world. So that is that. And hopefully, if you want to check it out and you enjoy it. Otherwise, next video will come out next week, as per usual. And I hope that you have a great day, week, and month ahead. Ta-ta.